Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What Are You Missing by Using Only EndNote Basic? I'm excited to provide an overview tour of all of the power features available to you with access to EndNote Desktop, currently EndNote version 20. These supercharged enhancements and workflows will help accelerate your research process and result in quantifiable time savings that will make your EndNote investment pay for itself very quickly. A fact even more true if you incorporated EndNote in all of your future research projects. I want to mention that I am recording today's webinar and will make the video available afterward to all registrants. If you find yourself needing to sign off before the end of the class, or if we happen to run a bit long, feel free to drop and you can review the rest of the course at your convenience with the recording link. I also want to mention that I'll share my PowerPoint presentation with everyone if you'd like to review the slide information in more detail. You can ask questions within the chat window during our webinar, and we'll circle back around at the end of the session to discuss those inquiries. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself. My name is Jimmy McCollery, Digital Education Specialist here at Clarivate. I work from the San Francisco Bay Area, where it's currently a sunny and warm 73 degrees Fahrenheit. I joined the EndNote team back in July 2000 and spent about a year with the customer care team. After that, I accepted a position with the product support team where I assisted customers with their use of a handful of research solutions: ProSite, Reference Manager, Reference Web Poster, RefViz, and of course EndNote. I had an opportunity to join Clarivate's digital education team in July 2018 and now primarily focus on developing EndNote training materials. I feel very honored to have assisted many researchers during my tenure in completing their research projects. In my opinion, there is no field of study too small to have a net positive impact on our global society. Ahead of diving into all the powerful features available in EndNote 20, I'd like to describe the various access levels within the EndNote ecosystem and describe some of the key differences between each tier of access. Of course, we've got the desktop version of EndNote, EndNote Desktop, which I had mentioned is currently EndNote 20. This is software that you can install on your computers, whether they're running Mac OS or Microsoft Windows. With EndNote Desktop, you can create virtually an unlimited number of EndNote libraries, file attachments, and references. And as we'll see today, there are over 40 power features that are only available with the desktop version of EndNote. In addition to EndNote Desktop, we've got the online solution in the EndNote ecosystem, EndNote Online. This is something that if you're an EndNote Desktop user, you have even more capabilities with regard to that online interface. After enhancing your EndNote Online account with your EndNote Desktop license, you have 2 years of unlimited online storage. So essentially, as many references and as many file attachments as you would wish to create, you can store those within your EndNote Online library. And in addition to those no limits to the contents of your EndNote libraries, you also have access to additional content files directly within the EndNote Online interface. Most users are going to be primarily focusing their usage in EndNote Desktop. As I mentioned, that's where you have the benefit of these power features. But if you happen to be away from one of your computers where you've installed EndNote 20, you would be able to still log in from the EndNote Online website to access all of your synced library references and file attachments. And directly from the web interface, you can review materials you've already gathered. You can create new references, you can attach new file attachments, and again, if you've set up the EndNote Sync feature in EndNote 20, any changes you make directly from the web interface will show up within your designated EndNote Sync library the next time you launch your EndNote 20 application. Now, let's say perhaps you aren't an EndNote Desktop user, but you've created an EndNote Online account and you're at an institution with access to the Web of Science. You'll have some additional functionality that even EndNote 20 users won't have in their EndNote Online account. If you're an EndNote Online user with access to the Web of Science and you've used the same credentials for your EndNote Online account as you've defined for your Web of Science account, you'll have some additional links within your EndNote online library so that you can quickly get back to a source record in the Web of Science to review that piece of literature within the Web of Science platform or the Web of Science environment. You'll also have a quick link to expand your search and look at related references indexed within the Web of Science. Those would be references that share at least one in-text citation in common with that source record. This is a great way to find literature that you may not have stumbled across any other way other than that comparison of the contents, the cited reference contents of those published research articles. In addition to those quick links back to the Web of Science, you'll also have within your EndNote online library for any reference that's indexed in the Web of Science, you'll have a dynamic time-cited information displayed right on your EndNote library, your EndNote online library, so that you can see, how influential each piece of literature that's indexed within the Web of Science and stored within your EndNote online library is within a particular field of study. And then on the flip side, within the Web of Science itself, if you perform a search within the Web of Science and one of your search results, let's say, is already captured in your EndNote online library, there's a little icon indicator to let you know that you've already captured that particular reference, which will help save you from creating duplicate entries in your EndNote online library. And for institutions that, again, have a Web of Science subscription, if they'd like to utilize EndNote Online, they can define one or more EndNote Online administrators. And those power users would be able to control which content files your EndNote Online users would be able to access. So if you wanted to truncate your list of output styles, if you know that maybe there's perhaps only a handful of styles your EndNote users, your EndNote Online users would be working with, you might decide as an EndNote Online administrator to temporarily remove all other output styles to really streamline the style selection process. Same goes for import filters and connection files. If you wanted to add or remove either of those other types of content files, again, you would be able to do so as an EndNote Online administrator, and any one of your users who is working with EndNote Online at your organization would see only those particular content files that have been defined with by whatever EndNote Online administrator. Now, the base tier of EndNote Online is what we refer to as an EndNote Basic account. With EndNote Basic, you can get, as the name implies, a pretty basic research paper done. You would have access to the top 21 most popular styles related to EndNote available to you to apply to writing projects that you're developing in Microsoft Word. Aside from that, you would be restricted to only storing up to 50,000 references in your EndNote Online library and up to 2 gigabytes worth of file attachments. Those storage limits, I did want to mention, would also apply to EndNote Online users who don't have access to EndNote Desktop, but also have access to the Web of Science. They would have the ability to select more than 21 styles, but EndNote Online users with access to the Web of Science, they too would have those limits of 50,000 references or up to 2 gigabytes of file attachments. I did also want to mention there's a free EndNote app for iPad and iPhone users that you can find in the Apple App Store. It acts as an extension of your synced library, your EndNote Online library, so that any reference materials that you might add directly from myendnoteweb.com via a web browser, you would be able to sync to your iPad or your iPhone. You can make additional changes. The iPad and iPhone app has a built-in web browser so that you can perform direct exports directly from those apps to capture new references. You can download additional file attachments, link those to records in your EndNote library. When you sync your library from the iPad or iPhone, those changes will be sent up to EndNote Online, where you would be able to access those resources as well. And if you also have access to EndNote 20, Any changes you make in that online interface would also sync down to your desktop library. So again, the EndNote app for both iPad and iPhone is something that pretty much any EndNote user would be able to take advantage of. The only requirement is that you have at least an EndNote Basic account. Now, I'd like to dive in. Like I mentioned, we're going to be covering, I think just about over 40 power features today that you have access to in EndNote Desktop that really, act as a great time saver. Some of these end goals you might be able to achieve via EndNote Basic with a little bit of manual legwork, but again, these features really are automated and help streamline the various steps of the research process to save you time in the long run. One of the primary benefits of EndNote Desktop, the software you would install to your computer for either Apple Mac OS or Microsoft Windows, is that you can work offline. There's the old adage that if something can go wrong on a deadline, it will. And even if, in general, you've got a very consistent internet connection, that could drop, at any time. Earlier today, it's a sunny day, but my power went out for 30 minutes. And, while I had battery power on my laptops, I was able to still work with my EndNote Desktop libraries. I couldn't connect to the internet, of course. There are certain features in EndNote 20 that do rely on internet access, but access to your EndNote library, so long as you store it on your local hard drive, as we recommend, you would still be able to look at all of the materials you've already captured, any PDF or any other file attachment you've linked to a library record, you would still be able to access those resources. And even worst case scenario, you can manually create references by hand, even if you typically capture new literature from various online information providers. In the worst case scenario, as long as you can boot up your computer, even without internet connection, you would, again, still be able to work with your EndNote library, open up, a local Word document, and continue to cite references. So this is, again, a great sort of level of flexibility that the desktop version of EndNote provides due to the fact that it's software you install on your local hard drive. With EndNote 20, you can develop multiple EndNote libraries if you'd like. For your personal use, we do recommend developing a single EndNote library to help streamline various search aspects of the EndNote application. Working with one library makes it easy to find, a reference that you've gathered, or locate and identify duplicate references. But it is your personal choice if you would like to develop separate libraries for different projects that you're working on or focus areas in your field of study. Here in this screenshot on this particular slide, it's a little bit small, but just describing it, I've got a library open, my local library open on the left side of this screenshot, and on the right side of the screen, I've got a library that someone else is sharing with me. I'm part of a library sharing team, and if I wanted to perhaps multitask and work between my own library and a team's library that I've been added to as part of that library sharing team, I can have both of those libraries open at the same time. I can dedicate, as we're seeing here, half of my screen to one particular library, half to the other. I could overlap the libraries if I'd like. And this flexibility, again, with the ability to create separate libraries gives you some flexibility with regard to multitasking. And if you choose to separate, projects, you have that flexibility. With EndNote Basic or EndNote Online in general, you've just got the one web library associated with your EndNote Online account. And that isn't much of a stumbling block for a lot of users, but if you did like to, distinguish various projects or separate projects in that regard with EndNote Desktop, you can essentially create as many libraries as you like for, any number of projects that you're working on. With EndNote Basic and EndNote Online in general, you have access to a quick search. It's a single search field. It sort of acts as a global search of every reference in your EndNote library that will query every single field in each one of those EndNote references. EndNote Desktop has that global search capability as well. We call it Simple Search in EndNote 20. But with EndNote 20, or EndNote Desktop in general, you can develop very complex searches With the advanced search interface that we're looking at on this particular slide, we're seeing an example of a very complex search that's querying, the contents of a particular EndNote library, searching all references, and which we're asking EndNote to show us all references from the year 2021, 2020, or 2019. In addition to those publication dates, we're asking EndNote to only show us references from those years that contain a series of particular keywords within the title field. So we're asking EndNote 20 to show us all references from those stated years in which the title field contains asthma and oxygen and albuterol and smoke. So again, you can craft a very complex search. You can, target a search to a particular field. You can craft a multi-parameter search in EndNote 20. You can target your search on a specific group or group set in your library. If you prefer not to search the entire library, you can perform a targeted search if you'd like. And with EndNote 20, you can also save these complex searches. So if a project that you're working on requires that you run a search on a periodic basis, maybe a systematic review project, you can craft that search once, and instead of crafting it again from scratch in the future, you can save that search and load it so that it's automatically populated the next time you need to perform that search. That not only helps to save time, but it can help to reduce, possible human error that may impact the results of your search and the overall results of a particular project that you're working on. So this is a great power feature that's available in EndNote 20 that you wouldn't have access to, if you're an EndNote Basic user. Not only can you, perform a search of your EndNote library and ask EndNote to show you any references that match the scope of that search, you can also, within a particular record or reference in your EndNote library, you can perform a reference-specific search and ask EndNote to highlight specifically where in that particular reference that search term is located. So you'll see on this particular slide, we're looking at one individual reference in my EndNote library here. We're querying for the term therapy, and EndNote is highlighting specifically where in that particular library reference that search term is found. So again, both the advanced search and simple search will identify, the references that fit the scope of the search. But if you wanted to get down sort of into a granular level within the reference itself to find precisely where that term or phrase is found, you would be able to achieve this with that reference-specific search that EndNote 20 provides from the Edit tab within the tabs panel that we see here. In EndNote Basic, you can perform a duplicate search with EndNote Online in general. If you perform a duplicate search from the online interface, EndNote is going to be querying your library for references that contain the same author, year, title, and reference type information. And EndNote Online is always going to check the entire contents of your EndNote Online library. With EndNote 20, you have up to 17 different configurable comparison fields that you can define within the EndNote Preferences screen, as we see here. So I would say, typically the default selection of author, year, title, and reference type is usually precise enough to not end up with any, false positives, references that are being identified as duplicates that aren't truly duplicates. That's something that can come up. Let's say maybe you're citing various book chapters, in which case you have more than one reference that has the same author, year, and overarching book title. It's the chapter title that's different. That might be an instance where you come into the EndNote Preferences window here, and maybe you would choose to check the secondary title field, which would be for a book chapter reference, would be the chapter title. So this, again, this sort of advanced capability with regard to what EndNote is comparing is something that you've only got access to in EndNote 20. And in addition to the ability to change which fields EndNote's comparing during a find duplicate search, in EndNote 20, you don't have to check your entire library for duplicate references if you'd like. If you choose to focus on a particular group or group set within your EndNote desktop library, you can select that particular group or group set prior to performing your find duplicate search. And once you select the find duplicates command, instead of checking every single reference stored in your EndNote library, EndNote would focus its duplicate detection efforts on that particular group or group set. So that fine-tuning of choosing which contents of your EndNote library can help various projects that you're working on be beneficial in the big picture. So this is a great time saver as well. With EndNote Desktop, you have a feature that's available to you, not set up by default, but there's no additional charge for it. It's a feature called EndNote Sync. It allows you to select a particular EndNote Desktop library to coordinate with your EndNote Online account, so that anything you add to that particular EndNote Desktop library will synchronize with your associated EndNote Online library. And then if you choose to install EndNote 20 on a second or third computer, typically a single user EndNote license allows the user to install the software on up to 3 computers at any given time for your own use, Windows or Mac OS. You would be able to, instead of moving your library between those various workstations, if you set up the EndNote Sync feature on any of those EndNote installations that you've performed, EndNote would automatically, as long as you're connected to the internet, coordinate the contents of your designated sync library on each one of your workstations. So let's say that you primarily work on a desktop computer, but you do have a laptop that you travel with. You can install EndNote 20 on both of those machines with the same product key. And again, as long as you've got internet access, you wouldn't have to move that library between computers on a thumb drive or something like that. EndNote would just sort of utilize your EndNote Online account to ensure that the contents of your designated EndNote Sync library is identical on each one of your EndNote installations. This could, it's another great time saver, help to make sure that you're not, moving your files around, which could, possibly result in, data loss. If, let's say, you put your EndNote library on a thumb drive and you lost that device, that's something you would not have to risk if you choose to coordinate the contents of your library between computers using the EndNote Sync feature. Now, once you set up EndNote Sync, you have the choice to, in EndNote 20, to share your synced library with up to 200 other EndNote desktop users. The prior library sharing team size had been up to 100 sharees, but with the recently released EndNote 20.1 update that just came out in the past several weeks, we've doubled the possible size of a library sharing team. So again, you can, if you wish, you can choose to share your synced library with up to 200 other EndNote desktop users. You can see an example here of a library sharing team that we've set up. I've shared my library with a handful of colleagues here at Clarivate. A couple of my colleagues have already accepted my email invitation. Those individuals are showing up as members. The other sharees, their invitations are still pending, as shown in the status column here. Once those persons have accepted my invitation via email, they'll show up as members and they'll be able to access my shared library as well. And I did just want to point out that if you choose to set up a library sharing team, you can assign varying levels of access to each sharee. So if you have some users, some team members or colleagues who only need to be able to search and cite from your shared library, you can give those persons read-only access. But if you have other team members who are going to be contributing to the library, maybe adding references or annotating PDFs, things like that, you can give those users read and write access, and in that case, they can do almost anything that the sharer can do in that team shared library. So if you do choose to set up a library sharing team, I would back up your library a little bit more regularly than usual, just in case someone makes an unintended change to the team shared library, and that change propagates to all team members. In that scenario, if that change wasn't caught in time, that without a suitable backup, that might be a scenario that you might have to recreate a reference or a group, something like that. But if you regularly back up your library, that'll help to ensure that you don't encounter any possible data loss due to what unintended changes I've described here. In addition to the library sharing team concept, you can, once you've set up a library sharing team, you've got access in EndNote 20 to an interface called the activity feed. That activity feed is found adjacent to sync status, as we see here. And what it does is the activity feed will show you up to 500 of the most recent changes made to a team shared library. You'll see, a particular date and time as to when that change was made. You'll see a particular name of a library sharee to let you know who made that particular change. The items that are sort of shown colored on the activity feed, you can click on, and you would be able to see any references in that library pertaining to that change. So in this example here, a little bit ago, my colleague Dan had added some attachments to 9 references. And if I was curious to see which references Dan had modified through that change, I would be able to click on that particular item on the activity feed, and EndNote would show me those references that I would be able to confirm whatever change was made. I did want to point out that from the activity feed, you can't undo a change. So it is, like I mentioned, important to save regular backups of your EndNote library, whether or not you're choosing to share your library with other EndNote users. Now, if you're an EndNote basic user or an EndNote online user in general, and you've got a PDF file attachment linked to one of your library references, you would pretty much have to rely on the designated PDF viewer or PDF editor on whatever workstation it is that you're using when you're accessing your web library. Most operating systems, modern operating systems these days, have a built-in viewer. If not, there are quite a few of them that you can download for free. But with EndNote 20, you can actually review your PDF articles directly from the EndNote 20 application without ever leaving EndNote 20. There's a built-in PDF viewer, as we see here. And from that PDF viewer, not only can you review the pages of each one of your PDF attachments, but EndNote 20 provides built-in PDF annotation capabilities. So if you wanted to highlight text, underline text, strike out text, or add searchable sticky notes, you would be able to do so from EndNote 20. Those changes, those PDF annotations, would synchronize between your various computers if you chose to set up the EndNote Sync feature. And in addition to that, if you do set up a library sharing team, all of those annotations will sync among the entire sharing team. So this gives you sort of an extra level of collaboration. And with the newly released EndNote 20.1 update that just came out a week or two ago, we've also reintroduced the PDF Preview tab on the Tabs panel found directly on the library window. So if you quickly wanted to look at just a preview of the PDF, you would be able to do so from that PDF Preview tab. If you've got a larger monitor, let's say maybe you're using a full-size television for your computer monitor, you might not even have to open up the standalone editor, or rather PDF viewer, as we see here. In that case, you might have enough screen real estate that directly from that PDF Preview tab, you might be able to review the actual pages of the PDF attachment itself directly from that tab. So I'm really happy to see that feature added back to this most recent update of EndNote 20. With EndNote 20, you can import PDF files directly from your hard drive. You can import PDFs one at a time, or if you'd like, if you perhaps have an entire folder of PDFs, as we see here on the screen, this example PDF import from EndNote 20 for Mac OS, you would be able to point EndNote 20 to an individual PDF or a folder of PDFs, and as long as you select the correct import option, indicating that EndNote should be expecting a PDF file or a folder of PDFs, EndNote will look through the first 2 pages of the PDF for the article's DOI number and the associated metadata for that file, looking for the article's DOI number. And as long as that's located and you are connected to the internet, EndNote 20 will automatically query a partner database called Crossref, which is sort of a metadata search engine. And as long as Crossref indexes that reference, your EndNote 20 will receive a fully populated reference to add to your EndNote library, and EndNote 20 will attach the PDF file to that new entry in your library automatically. I did just want to mention this feature can be hit or miss. If EndNote's not able to find that DOI number, there will be no details that EndNote will be able to query the Crossref database for, and in that scenario, you will still have the PDF attached to a placeholder record in your EndNote library, your EndNote 20 library, but in that scenario, you might either have to go through and fill in the missing information, or perhaps trash the placeholder record and try to capture it from an information provider that has an EndNote export option. So again, this is a great time saver, especially if you're coming across PDF articles through your discovery phase or discovery process. This is something that no version of EndNote Online would be able to achieve. This PDF import functionality is something that's only available in the desktop version of EndNote and can be a great time saver. Once you, decide that you would like to manage PDF articles in your EndNote library, you have the option to rename your PDF attachments in EndNote 20 if you'd like. Not doing so won't have any impact on your EndNote usage. But if you wanted to just add a sort of an extra level of conformity with regard to the names of your attachments, you would be able to achieve that from the PDF handling tab in EndNote 20. So we see here that there are a couple of hard-coded renaming options that are behind this window on the screenshot that we're looking at here. But if you wanted to define your own custom renaming convention, you can select up to 3 fields from your EndNote library records that EndNote would look at and use for whatever renaming efforts that you've decided to define on this particular window here. So again, this isn't a requirement, but you might notice that as you come across PDF articles on the web, various publishers and information providers will use different naming conventions. And again, if you just wanted to add an extra level of conformity with regard to your PDF attachments, you have that capability here. Now, this feature that we're looking at right now is for PDFs that you add going forward. If you've already begun to attach PDFs to your EndNote library, you can still rename those. It would just be a different menu item that you would select from the References drop-down menu in EndNote 20 to rename existing PDFs in your EndNote library through essentially the same workflow. It's just a different menu item that you would select to initiate that process. With EndNote 20, you have access to a feature called Find Full Text. This is a great resource only available in the desktop version of EndNote that would allow EndNote to go out onto the internet to look for new full text articles to download to your library references. You can look for these articles, one by one, or you can select a batch of references up to 250 at a time to select when you perform a Find Full Text search. By default, Find Full Text is querying, several open access resources, Web of Science full text links if you are at an institution with Web of Science access. If you're at an organization that employs an open URL server, either someone in your library or your IT department would typically be able to provide you with the open URL path, which looks like a web address that you would input on the Find Full Text tab in the EndNote 20 Preferences screen here. If you're at a larger institution like a university, you may be provided, again, either through your library or IT department, your authentication URL. There's a couple of examples of what that looks like here. And with the authentication URL populated, what would happen is once per Find Full Text session, a browser window would pop up in your EndNote 20 application, taking you to your institution's login page. You would, on that page, provide or input your institutional login credentials. And for that session of Find Full Text searching, EndNote may be able to access additional subscription resources that the application wouldn't be able to access otherwise to improve your overall success rates. And with regard to the outcome of a Find Full Text search, we see an example toward the bottom right of this particular slide. If the Find Full Text search is actively taking place, you'll find the searching heading indicating that the process is still in progress. Of course, the best outcome, as we see on this screenshot here, is that EndNote is able to find a PDF for you, and in that case, EndNote just downloads that file automatically. EndNote places the copy of the PDF that it's found within your library's data folder and links those PDF attachments to the associated references in your EndNote library. If EndNote finds a PDF resource, indicated somewhere on the web, but is unable to download that article article for you automatically. You'll get another heading called Found URL, where what will happen is EndNote 20 will add typically the publisher's URL to the URL field of that particular EndNote library reference. And usually you would be able to click that link. If you have an individual subscription with the that particular publisher for that journal, you might be able to log in from there, or you might have the option to purchase or rent the article. I did want to mention, if you happen to be affiliated with a university or another organization that has full text article access and something shows up as found URL, I wouldn't necessarily purchase any additional article without checking with your library or a librarian at your organization, because there's a chance that even though EndNote wasn't able to find that article for free, you may have access to the article through some other system like interlibrary loan or something like that. And then, of course, the final outcome of a find full text search in EndNote 20 is that EndNote's not able to find either a full text article or a PDF for a given resource in your library, and in that case, those particular references will show up under the not found heading. So again, this is a great time saver as well if you're not necessarily coming across PDFs through your discovery phase, or perhaps you just want to save time by not having to download these PDFs one at a time. You might first try to locate these articles via find full text in EndNote 20 and check to see if EndNote's just able to download those resources for you automatically. With EndNote Basic and EndNote Online in general, you have the ability to create what are called custom groups. These are, almost you could think of them as like folders in your EndNote library that you might create for different projects or focus areas in your field of study. But with EndNote 20, you have access to 3 types of library groups and a concept of what's called a group set. Of course, in EndNote 20, you have access to the custom group concept. Those are groups that you manually populate, and you assign a name to those custom groups. We also see on this particular slide an example of the configuration of what's called the combination group. That's the topmost picture on this slide, displayed on the Create from Group screenshot that we see. If you want to compare or contrast the contents of 2 or more groups in your EndNote library to see how they differ or how they overlap, you can achieve that goal with a combination group. And we also see an example of what's called a smart group. A smart group has a search linked to it that you define at the time of the creation of the smart group. And anytime you edit an existing reference in your EndNote library, or you add a new reference to your library, EndNote 20 automatically performs this defined search to determine whether or not those new materials should be part of that smart group. So this, if there's a, let's say, a very, important keyword in your field of study, and you want to make sure that you're spotlighting, any new literature pertaining to that topic, you might make a smart group that looks for a particular keyword, and then it will let you know if you've captured anything new that contains that particular keyword, or if you've got an influential author in your field of study and you just want to make sure you spotlight that person's newly published research quickly, a smart group can be helpful for that. I did just want to point out that, you can't manually associate any of your library references with a smart group or a combination group. If you want to alter the contents of a smart group or a combination group, you need to modify its underlying search to either broaden or narrow its scope. And I did also want to mention, like I described a little bit ago, in EndNote 20, you have access to what's called a group set. Sort of as the name implies, you would be able to create group sets for different projects that you're working on, or again, focus areas in your field of study. And within that overarching group set name, you would be able to organize various groups for different purposes related to that project or focus area. So again, this is a way to add an extra level of organization and possibly make it feasible to have completely separate projects, references for separate projects, all stored in a single EndNote desktop library, and be able to quickly look at any set of references at any given time by clicking on a particular group or group set within your EndNote 20 library. In EndNote 20, you have access to a feature called Find Reference Updates. This is, I would say, probably most useful for preprint articles, materials, literature that has been made available digitally ahead of print, perhaps before all of the metadata details are defined. And so, in the olden days of EndNote Desktop, before Find Reference Updates was created and introduced, you might have to periodically, check your existing library references for missing metadata. You might have to go into those various fields and manually input the missing data, or you might just choose to, delete that partial reference that you had already captured and replace it with a fully populated reference by exporting the fully populated reference from an online database again. But with EndNote 20, you have the ability to select one reference, or you can perform a Find Reference Update in a batch. And what EndNote will do is it'll go out onto the internet, it'll check PubMed for any new reference information, and the Web of Science. If you happen to be at an institution that has access to the Web of Science, the Web of Science databases will be queried as well. If there are any updates located, EndNote will show you a side-by-side comparison window like this. Your existing reference will be displayed on the right. Any available updates will be shown on the left. Any fields that contain differing details will be highlighted in blue, as we see here. So just as an example, for this particular reference, we see that the available update has a volume number, an issue, and a page range that are available to capture in my existing EndNote library reference. And then I can manage my references that are part of this Find Reference Update search one by one if I'd like, or I can apply whatever change I choose to all references in the batch. I have the ability to update every single field in each one of these references, or if perhaps within my EndNote library references I had already begun to customize the existing information and I wanted to ensure that I wasn't overriding any of my customizations, that might be an instance where I want to choose to update only the empty fields. I also have the choice to edit the reference. If I just wanted to manually grab specific bits of available information that does not yet exist in my EndNote library, I have the ability to do that as well. Probably the lesser used option. The biggest time saver here, of course, is just telling EndNote to either update all fields automatically or only update the empty fields automatically. But you do have the flexibility in EndNote 20 in that regard. With EndNote Basic, as I mentioned, you've got access to 21 of our most popular output styles. EndNote Online users with access to the Web of Science may possibly have additional styles, so long as their EndNote Online administrator hasn't restricted their set of available style files. And if you've enhanced your EndNote Online account with your EndNote Desktop license, you also, in the EndNote Online interface, would have access to additional style files directly from the web. But with EndNote 20 and EndNote Desktop in general, you have full control over which styles show up in your EndNote 20 style manager. By default, with EndNote 20, we install roughly 500 of our most popular output styles. But as you can see here on this screenshot showing our EndNote output style repository, we have just over 7,200 predefined styles available to download. There is a zip file if you did want to have every single style file available to you in your EndNote Desktop installation. You can download the zip file and position all the style files in the appropriate folder on your hard drive. But usually, I'd say most researchers are working with a handful of styles at most. And so if you are interested in downloading a new style file that we've just developed from scratch, or perhaps an updated style file, you can download those style files one at a time from the online style repository, and you can save those style files to your drive. You would open that downloaded style file for editing, and in EndNote 20, you would just perform a save as command. EndNote would save that downloaded style file exactly where it needs to reside on your hard drive for EndNote 20 to find that style, and afterward, that style would be available to apply to any research projects you're developing in Microsoft Word or another word processor. And I'd say, aside from our predefined styles, the biggest benefit with regard to styles in EndNote 20 is the ability to customize any existing style. So if you just wanted to make a slight modification to one of our pre-existing styles, EndNote 20 allows for that. If you wanted to make a style from scratch, you would have the ability to do so. So again, EndNote Basic does not provide that level of flexibility in that regard. With EndNote Basic, you have access to 21 of our most popular styles. You can, and again, with that, you can get a pretty basic research paper done, but you'll find that the ability to download additional style files and customize them further is, I mean, it's you know, indispensable, that capability in EndNote Desktop. You have full control over, you know, how EndNote is formatting your in-text citations, how EndNote is formatting various references in your bibliographies, so that you can, you know, be safe in the knowledge that you're, you know, conforming to whatever guidelines are required for your research project. Not only can you customize output styles, you can, with EndNote 20, customize individual import filters. Import filters are used if you're importing a plain text file from an information provider, and perhaps you want to modify, you know, where EndNote is importing the various pieces of metadata in your EndNote library records. From the in the example here on the right side of this slide, we're looking at the Templates tab on the Filter editor window. And if you wanted to, like I mentioned, you can redirect a particular bit of information by changing the associated field on the Templates tab here. Or let's say you're using the online search feature in EndNote 20, and perhaps you found a connection file that may be outdated. Perhaps the database administrator has changed their connection settings, and you found those Z39.50 database descriptors on the web somewhere. You would be able to edit that associated connection file to define those changes, or you would have the ability to create a new connection file from scratch, as long as that remote database supports the Z39.50 database protocol. You could create a brand new connection file if you'd like, and once you've done so, you would be able to connect to that particular database directly from EndNote 20. So EndNote Basic has access to filters and connection files as well. It's just far fewer than what you have access to in EndNote 20, and in addition, you don't have the ability to modify a filter or a connection file using EndNote Basic. With EndNote 20, you have the ability to, you know, back up your EndNote library. There is a save a copy command on the file menu in EndNote 20 that you can use to periodically back up your EndNote desktop libraries, so that, again, on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, if you want to help ensure that you don't encounter any data loss, you can use Save a Copy to duplicate your library, maybe save the backup on a network drive or a local sync folder, just in case your primary drive crashed. Your backups could live in the cloud or on a network drive, and you can restore those in the future if the need were to arise. But there's an additional backup feature available in EndNote 20 called the compressed library. And this compressed library process would allow you to take the ENL file and the data folder. There are two components associated with each EndNote library. The compressed library process would take those two components, store them inside of a single file that has a .enlx extension. If you're familiar with the concept of zip files, it's really the same underlying technology, I'd say. It's the type of file that can contain more than one item. This compressed library format is useful for backup purposes because instead of maintaining a separate ENL file and data folder, as would be required if you use Save a Copy, you would just generate one ENLX file that you could put on a network drive or a thumb drive or a local sync folder, and you would really only interact with that file if at some point your primary library became damaged, or again, your computer got stolen or your drive crashed. As long as you've got that compressed backup, you would be able to restore a copy of your library as it existed at the time of when that backup was created. This compressed library process is also useful if you wanted to share your library offline with another EndNote user. Let's say maybe you were collaborating on a particular project with a co-author, and you wanted to send that person a copy of your library so that they can review your references. If that person's at a different institution and you're unsure if they've got the appropriate rights copyright to review the full text articles that you've captured on this configuration window for the compressed library process. That might be a scenario where you choose to make a compressed copy without file attachments to ensure you're not running afoul of copyright law. And in addition to choosing whether or not to include your file attachments, let's say maybe you did have 3 group sets in your EndNote library for different projects, and your co-author in this scenario was just working with you on one particular project instead of sending your entire library. That might be an instance where you choose the radio button next to all references in group/group set, so that you're only sending that one part of your library that recipient would need access to. So again, not only is this compressed library feature useful for backup purposes, but this is a great way to be able to share your library sort of in an offline manner. And if your resulting compressed library was small enough to email, you would be able to attach your ENLX file to an email as an attachment to send to that person. And the only requirement would be on the recipient side is that person has a copy of EndNote Desktop as well, and that they've saved your compressed library file somewhere on their hard drive before they attempt to open the library and extract its components. This is something you really couldn't do with EndNote Basic. At most with EndNote Basic, you can create a tagged text file export, which would have all of your reference metadata, but it wouldn't include any groups, and that exported text file wouldn't include any file attachments. So again, this feature in EndNote 20 really simplifies the library backup process. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to change the sort order of your library contents. In EndNote Basic, there are some hard-coded options that you can resort by default. In EndNote Basic, your EndNote online library is going to sort by author information. There are other options, like I mentioned, where you can sort by title, you can sort by date added, let's say, but you can really get down to a granular level in EndNote 20 where, let's say maybe you have 2 references from the same author. You can choose a secondary sort parameter. In this case, we're telling EndNote 20, if you see 2 references that have the same author information, sort by the year details next, and then in this example, sort by record number. There are 2 additional parameters or criteria that you can define, just we don't see that here in this example. And not only can you choose which pieces of information, you can choose whether or not that information will be sorted A to Z or Z to A with the icon on the far right of this configuration window. And you also see at the very bottom of this configuration window, you have the ability to choose your sort language. So if maybe you're using another language other than English that might have a different sort order than you would typically expect, related to English language research, you would be able to choose that appropriate sort order for that particular language pertaining to the contents of your EndNote library. There's another Clarivate solution called EndNote Click. It's a web browser extension formerly known as Copernio. We're still in the process of rebranding this tool. So if you work with EndNote Click, you might see some places that still mention Copernio. We're still, working again to complete that rebrand. It has been integrated in EndNote 20 as well. So this is something that when you install EndNote 20, it loads automatically. Now, even if you do choose to stick with EndNote Basic, this is a tool that you can utilize in conjunction with your EndNote Basic account. Anyone can access this browser extension by visiting click.endnote.com. Like I mentioned, it's a browser extension that you can install and pretty much the most popular web browsers that are available. But if you're using EndNote Click in conjunction with EndNote Basic, the tool is going to help you find full text articles as it would with EndNote Desktop, but you would have to export those PDF articles one at a time from your EndNote Click locker to your EndNote Basic library. With EndNote 20, you have the ability to actually select multiple references all at once from a particular web search and send, not only those PDFs, but also the fully populated references that accompany each one of those PDFs to your EndNote 20 library. So just as an example here in this particular screenshot, we're looking at an example search on PubMed.gov, and we see, at least in this example, 3 found PDFs. and we've asked EndNote Click, to select all available PDFs. There may be more. We don't see the rest of this scrolling window, but at the very least, this particular export would capture these 3 references and their PDFs. And with the Export Selected PDFs button that we see here, it's got the diagonal arrow pointing up and to the right. If we were to press that, all of those references and, again, those PDFs would be sent to your active EndNote 20 library, and EndNote would receive those materials and begin to import them. And again, this is a great time saver. Just to recap, this EndNote Click tool is something you can take advantage of if you stick with EndNote Basic, but you've got even more functionality if you are working with a desktop version of EndNote like EndNote 20. With EndNote 20, you've got a command called copy formatted reference, where on a reference by reference basis or by selecting multiple references, you have the ability to generate a plain text bibliography formatted in whatever style guidelines you've got selected at that time. And after selecting the copy formatted reference command, you could open up an email, you could open up a word processor document, any sort of text editor, and paste those materials into your document. That would create a plain text bibliography that you could print out as is, or you can manipulate further, let's say in Word if you wanted to change the line spacing or the font after pasting in your Word document. All of those references would be plain text as if you've created them by hand, and you, like I mentioned, you can manipulate their appearance further if you'd like. You've got a traditional find and replace command. It's not something unique to EndNote 20, but it's not something you have access to in EndNote Basic. And so if you locate a typo, let's say, in more than one reference, instead of making that change one by one, you would be able to, as long as it's a uniform error, you would be able to, from the find and replace screen in EndNote 20, define whatever incorrect phrase or term that you want EndNote to look for, and you would be able to define the replacement term on this window. In this example here, we've got actually a library that contains more than one name format for a particular author. And there are certain styles that require you to disambiguate authors that share the same surname. In this instance, a human might realize that both of these instances of Dr. Pepperberg's name refer to the same person, but to EndNote, the difference between full first and middle names versus initials is enough to make EndNote think that that's different authors. So in this find and replace example, we're asking EndNote to look in the author field for a name format for Dr. Pepperberg in which her first and middle names are just initials, and we're asking EndNote to replace this with a full name. And doing so, making sure that all references from Dr. Pepperberg and our example library are within the same naming convention. That'll help EndNote understand that any reference I cite from that person is attributable to the same researcher, the same person, and EndNote would format the name accordingly for that an individual person in my research project that I'm developing. You've got another great global editing feature available in EndNote 20 called Change, Move, Copy Fields. It's almost a similar concept as find and replace, but the Change Fields tab that we see here would allow us to do things like, we're not looking for something to necessarily replace. Let's say maybe I had a handful of references that I've just captured, and maybe I'm applying my own keyword system, and I wanted to define a term that will help me locate these references going forward. I would be able to, let's say, make a group out of these particular references in my EndNote 20 library, and from the Change, Move, Copy Fields window here, I can ask EndNote to add a particular keyword or phrase to a particular field in each one of these references. But not only can I add a term or phrase to a number of references at once, if there's, let's say, a field that maybe is being populated automatically by an information provider with information I don't care to keep track of in my library, I can choose to clear that field if I'd like from the same Change Fields tab. Or if I'd like to change the casing of information in a particular field in my EndNote library, I can achieve that from this Change Fields tab as well. The Move Copy Fields, as its name implies, if I wanted to move information from one field to another, I would be able to achieve that from the Move/Copy Fields tab. Or if I wanted to retain the source field and copy that metadata to another field in my EndNote library records, I would also be able to achieve that from the Move/Copy Fields tab here from this particular screen. In EndNote 20, you have access to an interface that allows you to customize your reference types. With EndNote Basic, you do have dozens of reference types available to you for the various types of, research materials that you might need to keep track of and cite in a research project. But with EndNote 20, you can customize the fields that appear, the field names that appear for each reference type. You can customize the names of the reference types themselves. There are a couple of completely unused reference types. So if you have a type of research material that doesn't really fit one of our predefined reference types, you can create one from scratch if you'd like. You also have the ability to hide unused reference types. There's an example mentioned at the top of this window. If you never plan to, keep track of any map references in your EndNote library and you wish to just suppress the entire map reference type, you can achieve that by adding a period in front of the reference type name itself. So this really is, if you're looking to, again, get down on a granular level in your EndNote application with regard to the types of fields and reference types that are available when you're adding references to your library, you can achieve that with EndNote 20. In EndNote 20, you have access to a concept of what's called a term list. Now, by default, EndNote makes, for each EndNote library, EndNote will make a term list that tracks the author names added to your library. That includes editor names as well. A keywords term list gets created as well, so that EndNote is tracking each one of the keywords added to the keywords field in your EndNote library. And there's a journals list that's created by default. The journals list is a little bit more unique. We're going to look at in just a moment. But this is helpful because as EndNote's tracking these terms, it'll help jumpstart data entry going forward. If you are manually adding a reference to your EndNote library and you're inputting the data field by field and you go to type into a field that's actively linked to a term list, EndNote will start suggesting terms from that term list to save you from having to completely type out that particular term or phrase or that person's name. So again, that can be a great time saver. This can also help reduce possible error, human error related to data entry issues. So, if there's a particular keyword and you're having to type that over and over each time, there's, a chance that you might, introduce a typo by mistake. And if you rely on your term list for whatever field it is, you can create new term lists if you'd like as well. Each field in your EndNote library can be linked to whatever term you'd like, but this again can help reduce errors. And I did want to mention each EndNote library has its own term lists. So you can have completely separate term lists in library A as you do for library B. You do also have the ability, if you wanted both in this scenario, the term lists for library A and B to match, you can export your defined term lists from one library and you can import them into another EndNote library. Like I mentioned, the journals term list is a little bit different because what EndNote will do from the journals term list is check for a particular journal name that's included within one of your EndNote library records. And if you cite that reference in a research project, let's say in Microsoft Word, and your output style is set to substitute an alternate naming convention for a journal, so long as that name is defined in your journals term list, EndNote would be able to output an alternate term than what's found in your EndNote library record. So just as an example, let's say in your EndNote library records, you've got full journal names, but you're going to be submitting a research project to a journal that requires abbreviated names. So long as you've defined those journal names and their abbreviations on your journals term list, EndNote would be able to substitute those terms and help to increase, the overall consistency with regard to the journal naming conventions that are being displayed in your formatted bibliographies. And I did want to mention EndNote 20 includes, I think it is 14 different predefined term lists based on different fields of study. The example that we're looking at here is what we call the medical term list that uses the index medicus list of terms that's typically used or provided by references indexed via PubMed.gov. So this is, again, functionality you don't have access to in EndNote Basic. EndNote Basic, even if you have that requirement of an alternate naming convention as to what's found in your library records, EndNote Basic can only output the journal name that's found within your EndNote online library, and if you needed to output a different naming convention in EndNote Basic, you would have to go in your references one by one and replace whatever, I wouldn't say incorrect, but unwanted naming convention appears with whatever naming convention you would have to output for your research project. So this is a humongous time saver, and again, helps to increase the consistency of your bibliography. This is something that a publisher or an editor may, reject a research project, submitted research project over if you've got, inconsistency in that regard for your journal names. Within EndNote 20, you can create subject bibliographies. This is something that's, I would say, probably most useful, as we see here, mentioned on the left. If you were required, to generate a yearly faculty publication list for your subject bibliography process, you would choose the author field in that regard, in which case EndNote would show you a list of references pertaining to each author that's found within a particular EndNote library. The example that we see here on the screen here is a subject bibliography related to several keywords that are found within a particular EndNote library's keywords field. So we see the bolded headings of the various keywords. We see the number count next to it. Those details are modifiable if you'd like, but then we see each one of the references in the EndNote library that contain that particular keyword. So a different way to visualize your reference materials, and this, if you're actually going to be maybe visiting a brick and mortar library in person as the world is slowly opening back up, this might be a great resource for something like that to take with you. Introduced in EndNote 20.1, we've got a new feature. It's currently only available in EndNote 20.1 for Microsoft Windows. Coming soon for EndNote 20, EndNote 20 in general for Mac OS. But it's what we call library tabs. This is a concept that you've probably seen in action within a web browser or within perhaps your operating system. But it's a great way to be able to multitask without losing your place in whatever previous screen that you were on. So in this particular example, we see an EndNote library where we've got 3 groups open, and we can quickly click on any one of those tabs to look at a new set of references without losing our place in the previous group. So this is, an excellent feature, again, just implemented in EndNote 20.1 for Windows, coming soon to EndNote 20 for Mac OS. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to change your display fields. In EndNote Basic, you can, right on your EndNote online library window, you can display your author, your year, your title. But with EndNote 20, you've got up to 10 display fields that you can configure to show whatever pieces of metadata that you'd like. You can configure those fields as desired. And you can also change the headings. Let's say maybe within the label field of your EndNote library records, you're storing a personal filing number. From this screen here, if you wanted to display that filing number, you would be able to select the label field from the field drop-down. And under heading, in that case, since it's containing or displaying other information, maybe you'll replace the default label or heading of the label field with the replacement heading of personal filing number. So again, you've got up to 10 customizable display columns that you can configure to display various bits of reference information on your EndNote 20 library's reference list panel. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to automatically rename your PDF attachments, from this particular screen. It's on the same window that we were looking at before, but what I was trying to highlight here is the ability to define a PDF import folder. So as you're coming across PDFs, if you didn't want to import them one at a time, let's say maybe you just wanted to create a folder on your hard drive and you wanted to point EndNote to that folder so that EndNote would watch this folder on your hard drive for new PDFs. You can define it on the same tab, the PDF handling tab that we looked at just a little bit ago. But from that tab, once you've enabled automatic importing, every time you launch the EndNote application, EndNote would check that folder for PDF articles to import. And again, per PDF article, EndNote will look at the first 2 pages of text and the metadata of that particular PDF file to try to find the article's DOI number. and if that information is located, EndNote will, import a fully populated reference and attach the PDF at the same time. So this, again, another great time saver. Instead of manually enacting or initiating the PDF import, you can just define that PDF auto import folder, drop your new PDFs in that folder, and then it will take care of the rest for you. You have the ability on a reference-by-reference basis to email your references, in which case EndNote will, on Mac OS, use the default Mail app, or on Microsoft Windows, use Microsoft Outlook to, create a new draft email for you that has a sort of a summary of the reference in the body of the email message itself. It'll have a sort of a brief summary of that particular entry from your library in the subject field, and EndNote will attach any file attachments automatically as well. So if you wanted to share, a particular reference from your library with someone who might not have access to EndNote and maybe prefer not to make an EndNote online account, you can still share materials with, team members, colleagues, co-authors, professors, using this email reference command that's available in EndNote 20. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to rate your references. This is something not everyone is looking to do, but you have the ability to apply a 5-star rating system to the various entries in your EndNote library using whatever sort of subjective rating system you'd prefer. I'd say the most common rating system I've seen in use is the likelihood of including a particular reference in a particular research project, whether or not it fit the scope of the body of text for that particular project. I guess you could also use it for things like, the trustworthiness of the particular journal, that article is found in. Really any criteria that would benefit whatever research project you're developing. You've got the ability to not only, configure that rating, but you can display it as one of your display columns on your EndNote library window. You also have the ability to mark individual references as read or unread, so that, if you're in the process of reviewing literature in your EndNote library and you want to keep track of what you reviewed, what is left to review, you see the little dots that appear. Again, this is an optional display field in your EndNote 20 library, but you can, the items that sort of have the filled-in dot, those are materials that are marked as unread, still requiring review. The items that have sort of the blank dot, almost look like the circle within this column, those are references that we would consider read. And again, that's just a way to let you know if you've handled a particular entry in your EndNote library and looked at the underlying information or read any attached PDF article. So again, completely optional, but a great power feature available in EndNote 20. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to apply conditional formatting. Even though EndNote Desktop and EndNote Online use the same styles, this aspect of formatting is something that's unique to EndNote Desktop. So in EndNote 20, we see here an example of our default APA 7th output style. And one of the definitions is that if you cite a reference in which there is no DOI information, in those particular instances, EndNote will output the URL information instead. Same goes for, if you are using, information that in which the editor and translator field, that metadata is the same. EndNote will append, identifiers to let the author know, let your reader know that those two pieces of information are the same for both the editor and the translator. So this is, again, this is becoming more common. I wouldn't say a common requirement, but it is becoming more common, this sort of conditional formatting, and a formatting requirement that you can, comport to with regard to your formatted references using EndNote 20. You have the ability via the Cite While You Write add-in for Microsoft Word, you can categorize your references. Not something that everyone needs to do, but in some instances you may be asked to separate your primary sources versus your secondary sources, or print materials versus online available materials. And with the EndNote add-in for Cite While You Write via EndNote 20, you can choose to enable this Categorize References feature, and then you can go in and define your various categories and tell EndNote which category each one of your cited references should be associated with. And within a single Word document, you can make one overarching bibliography that has multiple categories if your research project or your report required such a formatting requirement. You have the ability in EndNote 20 to generate section bibliographies. If, let's say, maybe you're working on a book project that has various chapters, or maybe a report that has various sections that requires a separate bibliography for each section, you have the ability in your EndNote style to define EndNote to format in such a manner. We just see a real basic example of this here, 2 separate paragraphs, in which case we've asked EndNote to make a section bibliography for the reference cited in each one of those paragraphs. And not only can you make separate section bibliographies, but if your project required a cumulative bibliography at the end of your project with all references within your EndNote style using EndNote 20, you can apply that formatting requirement as well. And from what I understand, EndNote is the only bibliographic management tool that allows you to categorize your references or apply these section bibliographies automatically, something you can usually do manually, but again, EndNote automates this process for you. A great time saver in EndNote 20. You also have the ability to generate figure lists. There's a figure field in your EndNote library records in EndNote 20 where you can store images, as we see here. And then as part of the Cite While You Write add-in for Microsoft Word, you can insert figures. And you have the ability to either insert figures in line, where you've inserted the actual figure element itself, or you can choose to ask EndNote to make a figure list for you at the end of your project. I usually recommend, Word has functionality to do this as well, that's fine. If you choose to ask EndNote to manage your figure list, I usually recommend inputting your figures after you've developed all other elements of your document. If you worked with images in Microsoft Word in general, it can be very finicky. Microsoft Word can be finicky in that regard, where if you insert an image and change just a little bit of your layout of text, everything really goes wonky. And again, that's an aspect of Word usage that you would face if you choose to ask EndNote to generate figure lists for you, and a headache that you can really mitigate by inserting your figures toward the end of a project after you've laid out the rest of your body of text and cited your references. Not a requirement, but again, it can lessen a lot of headache with regard to managing images in a Microsoft Word document. You've got a feature that's available in EndNote Basic as well called Manuscript Matcher, which can allow EndNote to recommend up to 10 journals that may be interested in publishing your research project based on keywords found in the title field of your article, the abstract information for that particular project that you're developing. The benefit of triggering Manuscript Matcher from EndNote 20 directly via Microsoft Word is that Manuscript Matcher will receive your cited references automatically, and being able to consider your cited literature can provide the algorithm, the Manuscript Matcher algorithm, with additional data points to improve your matches, up to 10 matches that you'll receive via the Manuscript Matcher search to ensure that you've got even higher quality of matching journals that, again, may be interested in publishing your research project based on these details that I've described here. You have on the EndNote 20 version of Microsoft available for Microsoft Windows. There's an add-in for Microsoft PowerPoint. I do apologize, this isn't something available for the Mac OS version of EndNote 20. But again, if you're a Windows user and you install EndNote 20, when you launch Microsoft PowerPoint, you'll find an additional EndNote 20 tab along the ribbon in your research project. In your PowerPoint presentation file. And from here, you can choose with this add-in to cite in-text citations directly on the slides of your PowerPoint presentation. You can also use the add-ins to format references. This is something you can achieve with the copy formatted reference command as well. But we see an example here on this particular PowerPoint slide using the commands that are highlighted on the ribbon. We see toward the bottom of the this particular slide, we've used these tools to cite an individual reference from our EndNote library formatted in the PNAS formatting guidelines. So this is, again, a great optional resource that you have access to if you're working with EndNote 20 on Microsoft Windows. If you're a Mac OS user, there is a plugin that Apple has developed for Apple Pages. So if that is your preferred word processor, I would say that the Cite While You Write add-in for Microsoft Word is a bit more robust and dynamic, but if you prefer to work with Apple Pages, we're honored that Apple reached out to us, quite a number of years ago and, worked with us to develop an EndNote plugin for Apple Pages. So you have the ability from the Insert tab in Apple Pages to select a menu item called EndNote Citation, where you can query references from your active EndNote library to cite directly in your Pages project. And then from the Edit tab in Apple Pages, you can select the various output styles that you've marked as favorites in your EndNote program to reformat your references and in-text citations. So again, nice to have flexibility with regard to which word processor you're using when developing research projects.